Jeremy Clarkson tells Palestinians to announce that as far as you're concerned, the capital of America is London in cheeky response to Trump. Jeremy Clarkson has advised Palestinians to announce that London is the capital of the United States in response to President Trump recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The TV presenter wrote the cheeky message on Twitter earlier this evening, almost exactly 24 hours since President Trump's controversial announcement. Clarkson wrote, "Palestinians, why not announce that as far as you're concerned, the capital of America is London?" Yesterday President Trump broke with decades of U.S. foreign policy by officially recognizing Jerusalem, a city claimed by both Israel and Palestine, as the capital of the Jewish state. Clarkson's joke is clearly at the expense of President Trump's move, with the implication being that a mere declaration does not change the facts on the ground, and that naming Jerusalem Israel's capital is akin to naming London the USA's. It also tallies with a statement made by Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu, who said Trump's recognition doesn't automatically make Jerusalem the capital of Israel. Speaking yesterday, he added that with one announcement by a country, Jerusalem cannot be the capital of Israel. You can't come out and say, "I'm a great power, I can do what I want." Violent protests broke out in the West Bank earlier today after President Trump enraged the Middle East with his decision to recognize a new Israeli capital. Palestinians torched debris and hurled rocks towards Israeli troops who fired tear gas and water cannons to disperse a demonstration in Bethlehem. Medics said dozens of people have been injured by Israeli army gunfire during clashes in the occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip, with rallies underway in the cities of Nablus, Jenin and Ramallah. In Hebron and Al-Bayrat, thousands of demonstrators marched with chants of Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Palestine, witnesses said. Terrorist group Hamas also warned of a new intifada, or uprising, against Israel. Amid growing fears of fresh bloodshed in the region, the Islamist group said the president had opened the gates of hell with his flagrant aggression, while a pro-Hezbollah newspaper in Lebanon has declared death to America on a front page showing a burning U.S. flag. This morning, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan accused Trump of throwing the Middle East into a ring of fire and compared him to a blender stirring up trouble in the area. The country's Prime Minister Binali Yildirim said the U.S. has pulled the pin on a bomb ready to blow in the region. What is the status of Jerusalem? Israel set up its parliament in West Jerusalem when the State of Israel was proclaimed in 1948. The move followed the United Nations vote to partition Palestine on the basis of the British pledge known as the Balfour Declaration that paved the way for a homeland for the Jewish people. Israel occupied 78% of the land, with the remaining 22% split between Gaza and the West Bank. Then, in 1967, during the Six-Day Arab-Israeli War, Israel annexed Arab-controlled East Jerusalem, including the Old City. Israel has claimed ever since that both parts of the city are its undivided capital. However, Palestinians want East Jerusalem as their capital. Most countries, including Britain, do not recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and keep their embassies in Tel Aviv. Why is Jerusalem so important to both sides? Chiefly because of its religious history. The Temple Mount in the Old City is the most sacred place in Judaism, the site of Solomon's temple said to have housed the Ark of the Covenant and destroyed in 586 BC by the king of Babylon. The site is also the third holiest shrine in Islam, known to Muslims as Haram al-Sharif, noble sanctuary. It was the scene of Prophet Muhammad's night journey ascension from earth to heaven in 621. The compound includes Islamic shrines, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The city is also sacred to Christians. Jesus attended a temple in the Old City and was crucified on a hill outside its walls. But it also has hugely important implications for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. What has Donald Trump done and why is his intervention so toxic? Until now, peacemakers have pursued the strategy that Jerusalem would be part of an overall negotiated settlement, with its status decided in the latter stages of peace talks, with agreement on both sides. But if America jumps to a conclusion on the city's status now, and takes Israel's side, many fear it will undermine the chances of a peace deal. It could also damage America's position as an honest broker between the two sides. It does not take much to spark violence in the Middle East. In 2000, the Second Intifada, 2 bloody years of Palestinian suicide bombings and Israeli military killings, started after a visit by the then leader of the Israeli opposition, Ariel Sharon, to the Old City site. How can the status of Jerusalem be peacefully resolved? Jerusalem is described as the most intractable part of the world's most intractable conflict. But one of the main planks of the peace process is a two-state solution, in which Jerusalem would serve as capital of both states, East Jerusalem for Palestine, West Jerusalem for Israel. About a third of the people living in Jerusalem are Palestinians. An uneasy coexistence is lived out day to day, under the watchful eyes of clusters of armed Israeli police. Though there is generally free movement around the divided capital, Israeli security forces set up checkpoints to seal off Palestinian neighborhoods in times of tension, such as a wave of stabbings in 2015. Since 1967, Israel has built a dozen settlements, home to about 200,000 Jews, in East Jerusalem. These are considered illegal under international law, though Israel disputes this. Jerusalem is governed by a mayor and city council whose members are elected to 4-year terms. Palestinian Arabs living in East Jerusalem have the right to vote in Israeli elections, but most refuse to do so. How does Trump justify moving the U.S. Embassy? The U.S. Embassy is currently in Tel Aviv. To move it to Jerusalem would be a powerfully symbolic and inflammatory gesture in support of Israel and in defiance of Palestinians. But technically Trump has a legal framework. In 1995, amid lobbying from pro-Israel Americans, the Republican-controlled Congress passed a law, the Jerusalem Embassy Act, which instructs the president to move the embassy. But all presidents since Bill Clinton have signed a waiver every 6 months to prevent it happening. So why has he done this now? Mr. Trump's move seems driven not by diplomatic calculations, but by a campaign promise and his current low ratings. In 2016, he appealed to Christian evangelicals and ardently pro-Israel American Jews by vowing to move the embassy. His pledge was extremely popular with these voters, including casino magnate Sheldon Adelson, who donated $25 million to the Trump cause. Mr. Adelson expressed anger when Mr. Trump signed the waiver in June to keep the embassy in Tel Aviv. Advisors said this week Mr. Trump was making good on his promise. Why are all the Arab countries so hostile to the move? Opinion polls show that at least 90% of Arabs view Israel as their main enemy. So no Arab regime can risk provoking internal political upheaval by appearing to side with the U.S. Mr. Trump could now have catastrophically undermined his own Middle East strategy of trying to forge peace, not just between Israel and Palestinians, but also between Israel and Saudi Arabia's Sunni Muslims. He wants the Saudis to take on and curb the growing influence of Iran's Shia Muslims, the Sunnis' mortal enemies, and their allies in Iraq, Syria and Lebanon. The Saudis could now be forced to abandon their gradual clandestine move towards open acceptance of the Jewish state. Do other countries recognize Jerusalem as the capital? The world, including China, is virtually united in not recognizing Israel's claim to Jerusalem as its undivided capital. One exception island, the Pacific island of Vanuatu, which recognized it in May this year. Its late president, Baldwin Lonsdale, was an evangelical Christian who was described as having a strong connection to the Jewish people and to Israel. Taiwan also considers Jerusalem as Israel's capital. However, Israel does not even recognize Taiwan as a country. Russia's position is slightly ambiguous but seems to leave room for the city to be Israel's capital in the event of a peace deal. President Erdogan spoke to Pope Francis on the phone and the pair agreed there should be no attempts to change Jerusalem's status. Emphasizing that Jerusalem is sacred to Jews, Christians and Muslims, President Erdogan and Pope Francis stated that any attempt to change the city's status should be avoided, sources in the president's office said. Russia said today that it viewed Trump's move with serious concern and will criticize the new stance at the UN Security Council. Britain's Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson described the new stance as not helpful, while France rejected the unilateral decision and Germany said Jerusalem's status could only be resolved on the basis of a two-state solution. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Trump had bound himself forever to the history of Jerusalem with his announcement and claimed other states are now considering following the U.S. lead.